More now, we're joined by France 24's Claire Paccalin, who is there. Claire, first of all, what more do we know about just why exactly this plane crashed in 2009?
Well, in that first trial that you mentioned, Jeannie, the court did get a lot of information about the final moments of the aircraft before it crashed into the Atlantic Ocean in June 2009. Most of the heart of this case centers around the pitot tubes, so the pitot speed sensors. These are a very important part of an aircraft. They measure a range of data, but crucially, they measure the speed of the aircraft. They're called pitot tubes because it was a French engineer, Henri Pitot, who invented them 300 years ago. At the time, there were no aircraft, of course, but he invented these pitot tubes to measure the speed of water. They're now used on aircraft, and during the plane's flight, they got clogged with ice. The aircraft was in a high-altitude thunderstorm, and the pitot tubes got clogged with ice. This meant that the pilots got false, incorrect readings as to how fast the aircraft was traveling. And then the aircraft's autopilot system failed, which means the pilots had to manually take control of the plane, but they had the wrong readings because the pitot tubes had been clogged with ice. The pilots took control of the aircraft, but they failed, they lost control, and it plunged into the Atlantic Ocean. Now, in that first trial, the court found that Air France, so the airline, and Airbus, the manufacturer, were responsible for some failings and some acts of negligence, but that was not enough for a criminal conviction. That was not enough to find them guilty of involuntary homicide or involuntary manslaughter. And that was, of course, disappointing for the family members of the victims, but Air France and Airbus have always maintained that they are not guilty of involuntary manslaughter.
Claire, it's been 16 years since this crash happened. Here we are again with this appeals trial starting again today. Just talk us through why this legal process has taken so long.
Certainly, well, colleagues of ours, Jeannie, who were in the newsroom at France 24 that day 16 years ago, they will remember the news coming through of the aircraft getting lost, the confusion and the horror to find that no one on board had survived. This was the worst crash in Air France's history. Now, it took 2 years for the black boxes to be found. They were retrieved from the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. And then, of course, there was a lengthy period of time when the data inside the black boxes needed to be analysed. Then the investigating judges who had the dossier felt that there wasn't enough evidence to go to trial, and the public prosecution in France felt that there was. So all this meant that the case dragged on and on and on. It's also a very complex case, and so the justice system needs to make sure that it's given itself time to go through the very many volumes that this case consists of. And it really has meant that for the families of the victims, this has been a very, very long road. 16 years is a long time, and some will be coming to the courthouse where I am later on this afternoon when the trial begins. It begins at 1:30 Paris time, and some of the family members of those victims will be here today because from their point of view, they would like to see a guilty verdict for Airbus and Air France. But again, Airbus and Air France have always maintained that they are not guilty of involuntary manslaughter. Air France saying that it will always remember the victims of this crash and that its staff and passengers' safety is its absolute priority.
Claire, thank you for that. France 24's Claire Paccalin there.